Frank in 1980. I had a gig as a disc jockey in the desert. Came back from that and decided just to get a regular job. I got a job at the Manufacturers Bank, downtown Los Angeles. And that's where I met Frank. First day I came in, there's all this laughter in the back. I look back there, somebody laughing. Look back again, they're laughing. I go back and check this out. It was Frank holding court with about 20 people, telling the jokes, doing whatever. We used to send out statements. It was the statement department, so we had to match the number of checks in your bank depositor with the amount that it said. And so we do that. We send out these trays. I worked for 2 hours overtime in the evening on month end, and I sent out 6 trays. Very proud of myself. I looked at the sign out sheet. Frank had sent out 47. He was a fantastic worker. He did the work with about 4 or 5 people. Thinking back on it, I've got to say Frank was probably the most intelligent man I ever met in my life. He definitely had the best sense of humor. And, you know, the reality of it is, I miss him very much. Our time together was from like 1980 to 1993. And I knew him at the bank. And every Friday night, we would meet at El Coyote. And I had double margaritas for $1.90. Every Friday night we'd have a meal, we'd have 2 double margaritas and a Mexican coffee. And then we'd go to the car to sober up and just talk for a while. Well, let me tell you, 2 double margaritas and a Mexican coffee and then talking to Frank Giordano alone in a car, that's a recipe for a very, very good time. We had so much fun. And after a while, we used to tape I used to bring a little tape recorder, and I just taped them. And I never knew why I was taping these things. I thought it's too good to pass up. Maybe I'll make something out of it later, or maybe I won't. But, of course, years later, whenever Frank was sick, I talked to him. He said, why don't you play a tape for a couple minutes, you know? And that might be kind of nice to have at my memorial service if I ever have one. So I said I would. And so I started reviewing the tapes, and I realized in making these tapes, it was really interesting, the stuff we talked about. We talked about God a lot. We talked about metaphysics, the nature of reality. We talked about, we sang a lot. Every 2 minutes we were singing songs. I knew more rock and roll stuff, he knew more show tunes, but we would always sing, he'd be a third above. He always said he could sing a third above Primal Scream. It was interesting listening to those tapes. I mean, he was like my best friend. And you know, no subject was off limits. We just talked about whatever you want to talk about. And he was so open and honest and so funny. Those moments were so precious to me. When I look back on the tapes, I realized the good times we had and how special it was. But it was kind of difficult to pick out 2 minutes where one of us wasn't dropping the F-bomb. you know, Frank, you know what I mean. And, it's very difficult to find out. Well, there's a good section. It's really funny. About a minute and a half of that, about a minute, he drops a big F-bomb and who's that? So another one I checked out, that was good one, then I dropped the F-bomb. I did eventually find a couple of minutes, and it's not the funniest things we ever said, but it's just reminiscent of what Frank and I used to tape. And what it is we would always sing, and at the end of it, we would always sing Happy Trails to each other before we went home. We'd sing that old Ward Rogers tune, which, you know, Frank knew the words to everything. I didn't know all the words that made them up. I think I had the words wrong, but who cares? We used to always sing Happy Trails at the end of it, and it was just a special time. It's hard to stand up here and talk to you all about what Frank meant to me. You know, it's difficult. It's an impossible task to do that. But, you know, I don't have to, because you all knew him. If you knew Frank, you knew how special he was. There was nobody like Frank. There was nobody that had his talents. Like somebody talked about earlier, he was a very good-natured person, had a great heart. He would give people money that no one knew about. He was just really, really a very advanced soul, I thought. I love Frank dearly. And for me, you know, what's a man's life mean? To me, Frank's life to me meant the joy that he gave me. Just to be around that guy. I went to work every day looking forward to it. I hated working at the bank. I loved being around Frank. 8 hours, we sit in the back and send out statements and just laugh and talk. It was an education. And I had so much fun. And I don't have that anymore. really miss it. You know, people like that in this world are special, and it's really rather rare. I've never had anybody, you know, I felt that way about. I mean, I've had, other than my wife Terry, I've had 2 best friends in my entire life. Frank was one of them. You know, he was in my wedding as my best man. I remember once we were at the wedding and they had rehearsed. You're supposed to be lighting candles with the other guy was in my wedding, and it worked fine. Then during the wedding, the candles wouldn't light. You know, my friends wouldn't light. So Frank saw this happening. Of course, ultimate show, this guy came over with his candle and lit all the other candles that this guy was having trouble lighting. You know, Catholics are very good with candles. But he was always good in a crisis. He was just a great friend. And you know, if I had to live this incarnation over again, I've met a lot of great people. My dad was really a major influence on my life. What a guy. But other than my family, if there's one guy, you know, other than my wife Terry, there's one guy that I want to make sure I didn't want to miss. It would have been Frank. He impacted me that much. And you don't really realize until, I haven't seen Frank much. You know, we call on our birthdays and stuff, but we haven't seen each other for a long time. Looking back, you have perspective on your life, what certain people have meant to you. And, you know, I'll just tell you, Frank, there'll never be anybody else like you. I loved you. And so, you know, I just want to say, there's one last thing I can say to you, Frank, to do this. If anybody wants to join in, we're more than happy to. Happy trails to you, till we meet again. Happy trails to you, keep smiling until then. Although there may be troubles in the weather, as long as you love me together. Happy trails to you, till we meet again.
Frank was always a joy to have in our family. When he left Chicago, I was heartbroken, but he followed his dream. He told me he never regretted anything in his life that he chose. Whenever I was down, my husband used to say, "Why don't you call Frankie?" I was never sorry because he always made me laugh. I could leave my downer behind. I have so many stories about him when I was a kid, and I will always remember all of them. So thanks, Cousin Mimi.
Frank made it fun. So I started thinking about speeches, and I drew them out, and then went online this morning and found some jokes. Picked the ones that I thought Frank, I could actually, some of them I thought he'd probably come out of his mouth. So bear with me. If this is extremely offensive to anyone, so be it. Death is God's way of saying, hey, you're not alive anymore. Let us not think of Frank as dead. No, Frank is not dead. He is just electroencephalographically challenged. A doctor was speaking to Frank, his oncologist. He said, the results of your test are conclusive, Frank. I'm sorry, you've got 6 months to live. Oh my God, said Frank. Is there anything I can do? The doctor said, yes. You can try lots of mud baths, says the doctor. And he says, will that cure me? He says, no, but it will help you get used to lying in dirt. It goes downhill from here. Frank used to say, when I die, I'm leaving my body to science fiction. People used to ask me, what did Frank die of? I say, nothing serious. Oh, geez. Oh. That kind of a crowd, all right. Many of you probably don't know this, but Frank visited his attorney to make his last will and testament. And he said, so what exactly do do I do? What exactly do I do? And the lawyer said, well, just answer a few questions, then leave it all to me. Well, says Frank, I'm quite fond of you, but I was hoping to spend it all now on Viagra and Oxycontin.
Some of my favorite memories were working with Frank between shows. We'd all run downstairs, we'd set chairs up in a big semicircle, we'd set a chair over here, we'd sit Frank in the chair, all of us would sit and just listen to Frank tell stories. And they were always absolutely hysterical. He always had us in stitches. There was never a moment in his life that Frank wasn't hysterically funny. Every once in a while, our boss would forget to send us our checks. And Frank would go, okay guys, we're doing a no check show. The no check show consisted of us coming out doing a big opening number. Frank would sing a solo. Everybody would do a big closing number. The show lasted about 4.5 minutes. And then we'd go out and have a drink. Frank was so incredibly valiant. I think all of us are just in awe of the way he lived his last few months. I mean, I can't believe the way he was so organized with planning everything just to the nth degree. But he never lost that sense of humor, never lost his sense of humor. He told me, maybe about a month or so before he passed away, a friend of his, very, very close friend of his from the old Simpson days, had been in Europe, came home, got off the plane, checked her messages, and found a message that said that Frank was very seriously ill. She immediately called him, sobbing on the phone, going, oh my God, Frank, I just heard. Oh my God, Frank, I just got off the plane. I'm still in JFK. I'm still in the terminal. And he said, don't say terminal.